a finger down if in 2023 you quit your job, moved into a 25-foot RV with your parents to go live in Texas for 2 months, to go learn about an industry that you knew nothing about before you started, so you could then come home and start your own business, and proceeded to do that for the rest of the year. And it was a wild ride. Anyone? If you are looking to go to the NRVTA this year, or you're considering being a small business girly in 2024, here are 23 things that I learned in 2023 that I wish I had known before I started my small mobile RV repair business. Because side note, almost all of the small business content on YouTube is either for like Amazon drop shippers, or like Etsy girlies, which, don't get me wrong, I love a good studio vlog. I love the vibes, but it's just very different than what I do, playing with the electricity and getting covered in transmission fluid. These are 23 life lessons that I wish I had known before this year started. Some of them are life lessons that I'm still trying to remember every day, and some of them are more nitty-gritty, like use this software, don't use that one. Starting with check your fuses. This is great advice both for RVers and for small business owners. If you don't know how to check your fuses, I've got a video here that explains how, but also just general life advice. When you feel yourself panicking, check the simplest, easiest, cheapest solution to your problem first, and then you can allow yourself to panic. As someone who really struggles with anxiety, my brain has a tendency to catastrophize when things go wrong, and I made it a rule of thumb that whenever my brain wanted to go into hyperdrive, I needed to stop and check the fuses, check the simplest, easiest solution to my problem first. Lesson number 2, your real friends are going to be there for you no matter what. In the middle of 2023, I had this panic attack because my business wasn't getting up and running as fast as I needed it to, and I was starting to get nervous that I was either going to have to go get a job just in order to pay the bills while I got the business running, or I was going to have to go back to my old job with like my tail in between my legs, which I really didn't want to do. And on top of all of that anxiety, I also had the anxiety that all of my friends were seeing me shoot my shot. They were seeing me quit my job and start this business and sort of follow a dream. And I just had in my head, if they saw me fail at that they were going to think less of me, which is a lot to unpack. But the logic that helped me get out of that anxiety spiral was that I think that my friends are super dope and awesome and some of the coolest people on the planet. And if somebody were to watch me shoot my shot, follow a dream, go for it, and have it not go exactly according to plan and think less of me because of it, then that person would be an asshole. And I don't think my friends are assholes, so therefore they wouldn't do that. And the data and the reality showed itself out. Like, my friends have been there for me every time I've needed them this year. And like, your friends who are good people will also be there for you. So don't think less of your friends in an attempt to think less of yourself. Lessons number 3 and 4 go hand in hand. If you are comfortable, you're not growing. And if you're not failing a little, you're not finding your limits. So I originally quit my job in large part because I didn't feel like I was growing as a person. I didn't feel like I was learning anything new consistently. I didn't feel like I was being stretched, and I was really feeling understimulated, like I needed more in life. And so I started a business, and in many ways was overstimulated in that way this year, and had to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you have to remind yourself in those really uncomfortable moments that like, this is what you wanted. You wanted personal growth. Well, personal growth isn't easy, and you aren't growing as a human when you're in your comfort zone. Like, growth happens outside of that circle. And a similar lesson that like really helped my brain wrap around this was the idea that if you're not failing every now and again, you're not finding your limits. If you don't know me in real life, you wouldn't know that like I am a gym rat in my real life. I love working out. I love lifting weights. I love lifting heavy. And I work out at a gym that has bumper plates, so you can drop the weights whenever they're too heavy or whenever you fail a rep, you just drop the bar and it's totally fine. And I once had a woman come up to me and she's like,
"You're really comfortable failing."
Which, like, ooh, was a lot to unpack. But also, like, she was right. Because in my head, in the gym, if I'm dropping the bar, you know, once a week or like once every other week because I'm failing a rep, that means that every time I do that, I know that I am pushing like the very edges of my capability. And I found it. I found that limit, which is like super exciting. I really was comfortable with that in the gym. And this year, it was really about taking that life lesson from the gym and translating that from real life. Lesson number 5 was thanks to my dad. We learned it at the NRVTA, among many other things. In the first week of the NRVTA, it is so extremely overwhelming. It is just a deluge of new information. And a lot of what you learn in week 1 is the basics of electricity, which is something that I'm pretty comfortable with even before I started my business and started working on RVs. I've worked with electricity in different professional settings, like the basics I had. And I still was finding myself feeling overwhelmed and a little confused at times during that first week. And I remember looking up during those times and looking around, and everyone is nodding their heads.
They're like, yes, this all makes perfect sense.
And I went to my dad that night when we were like back home at the RV over dinner, and I was like, Dad, how is everyone else getting this? Like, I know everyone here is smart and comes with their own background, but like the part that we're talking about is the one thing that I know a lot about that I know most people don't. And like, how are they understanding this in moments that I don't? And he was like,
Emily, they're not understanding it. They're not getting it more than you are. They're just nodding their heads. No one else in the room wants to seem dumb.
And that for me was like just a huge click of like, oh, if I'm just willing to just be the dumbest one in the room, I'm gonna learn more than anyone else here. And just from that day on, I was like, cool, I'm just gonna ask the most questions. I'm gonna ask 2 times more questions than anyone else in the room, because then I'll have learned 2 times more than anyone else here. And like, if I'm only gonna be here for 2 months to get as much information as possible, then I'm going to just squeeze everything I can get out of this experience. And so I am never going to nod my head when I don't understand something. You gain nothing from being the smartest one in the room, but you can gain everything if you're just willing to be the dumbest. Lesson number 6 was similarly learned at the NRVTA, and that was you do not fully understand something unless you can explain it to somebody else. My dad and I went to the NRVTA together, and every night over dinner, we would go back and forth explaining different things that we had learned that day back to each other. This was so helpful because there were times where I'm like, yes, I think I understand what we went through, but if you can't then immediately explain it to somebody else, then it's really not in your bones. You really haven't absorbed it and understood it fully. You'd be amazed how many things you heard, you think you've internalized, and then when you try to say it back out loud, you're like, ooh, it didn't stick. This next lesson is more nitty-gritty. Google business profiles need to have an address for them. This is really difficult for mobile-based businesses because my business doesn't necessarily have an address that I want customers going to. And so when I first made my Google business profile, I didn't put an address down. And then months went by and I was like,
no one is calling.
And I remember everyone being like, Google business profile is where it's at. It's going to be what drives all your business. And I was like,
excuse me, who?
And then one day I randomly saw in a forum or something, they're like, it really needs the address. Went back in, just put in a random address in town just to have something. And my business blew up the next day. Life-changing, a mistake. Like if I could go back in time and tell beginning of 2023 Emily one lesson, dear God, it would be that. Put an address in your Google business profile. Number 8, taking things personally is a choice and one you don't have to make. One day I bolted up awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, realizing that I did not know the location of a part that I desperately needed for the call the next day. And I went to a full-blown panic. My boyfriend found me in my underwear, rummaging through the garage, looking for this part and getting into a deeper panic, realizing I had lost it. Like, it was just the reality of the situation. I didn't know where the part was. My boyfriend very wonderfully was like,
there's nothing we can do about it now.
Luckily, in the morning, I found out the customer had the part. I had left it the last time I had seen them. Thank God, everything went fine. And my boyfriend checked in with me that afternoon just via text being like,
hey, did you find that part? How are we doing? I know you take things like this very personally.
And I don't know why, but that just like clicked in my head so well. Him saying, I know that you take things like this very personally. I was like, I don't have to. Other people don't. I could just let this go off like water off a duck's back and just go with the flow. And I'm not saying that I'm like great at this now and I'm perfect at it now. It just like fundamentally had not occurred to me until that moment when he sent that text. I didn't have to take every mistake as a personal failing of myself. And wow, is that a big weight off of your shoulders when you can go through the day like that. Number 9, another nitty gritty one, don't use QuickBooks. I spent hours and hours fighting with it and could never get it to work as simply and calmly as I wanted. It has more features than I could ever need, and I think it has just gone too complicated for what a lot of beginner small businesses need. It's also $30 a month, which is wildly expensive, at least in my opinion, for what it does. I just have looked into and started using a thing, I think it's called Hurdler. Boop, boop. And so far it is working so smoothly. The homepage just has like 6 things, and it's the 6 things you could actually want to see, as opposed to the way too many things that would pop up on the QuickBooks dashboard. Everything has just worked. It doesn't do anything really different than QuickBooks or more than QuickBooks. It just does it all simpler, smoother, easier. I've only used it for like a week, but that week has been amazing. And it's, I want to say like $8 a month for the simple version and $16 a month if you want to file your taxes with it at the end of the year. And I think the $16 is worth it. So almost half the price of QuickBooks and with much less heartache and headache. Highly recommend, at least so far. Number 10, assume the customer is wrong in the nicest way possible. I cannot tell you how many calls I've been on where I've shown up and the customer was like,
this happened and this happened, so it must be this.
And for some reason, my brain always latches on to what they say. And I'm like, oh, cool, we can skip a bunch of steps. Let's just go to that. And it has screwed me over almost 100% of the time. If you have a process that works for you, stick to it no matter what the customer says. Sometimes the information they present is not in the way that my brain computes it. And so if I follow my process, I get the information that I need in a way that my brain can understand. And I find when I follow my process and not try to skip steps based on what the customer said, I usually get to answers quicker, more confidently, and smoother. Number 11, starting a business is more expensive than you think. You just need to assume it's going to take twice as long to get up and running and be twice as expensive. Just have even more of a parachute than you think you need, because once you start getting into that anxiety spiral about money, it's really hard to get out, and it's really hard to think about the business like a game and think about making strategic moves when you're just nervous about being able to pay your bills. Which brings me to lesson number 12, the anxiety will pass. I remember for my first call, and I was just so anxious, not only about the call and just wanting it to go right, and also like anyone else there who's had anxiety, there's not only the anxiety about whatever is making you anxious, but there's also a level of you that is anxious that this anxiety will never go away. That anxiety will pass. Right now, I don't feel anxiety about going to calls. I did in the beginning, don't get me wrong, but I promise the anxiety of,
am I going to be able to solve their problem? Are they going to feel confident in me? Are they going to be upset that they called me as opposed to somebody else?
That will all pass. Give it a couple months and it'll go away. I promise. Number 13, you must think bad ground before bad electrician. The NRVTA, again, because they're trying to throw so much information at you, I don't think they cover bad grounds enough and what they look like and how they can present themselves, because bad grounds look so freaking weird in the real world. And every time I run into them, my brain goes like, oh, this is some crazy electrical situation happening that I've never seen and will never understand. And 9 out of 10 times that I'm thinking this is going to be a situation that's too complicated for me to understand, it's a bad ground. Now, I'm not saying finding that bad ground is easy all the time, but at least gives you a starting point. So like that is my new motto: bad ground, not bad electrician. Ooh, moving on to marketing. If you've been following me, you know that like I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, I have a blog. It was a lot, and I'm definitely cutting back quite a bit in 2024. So lesson 14, when it comes to reels and shorts and TikToks, quantity cannot outdo quality. When I first started this year, I had a lot more time on my hands because the calls weren't coming in yet. And I was like twiddling my thumbs. And so I was like, well, let me just make more reels and more TikTok and more shorts. And at least there'll be more marketing out there and more people will see me and hear me. And then as the calls start coming in, I started having less and less time for that. So I really just started taking clips from my YouTube videos to make into shorts. And they just didn't make sense without the context of the larger video. They didn't have like the snappiness that you need just for reels and shorts. And honestly, making them all took so much time for how little I got back. So like if you're going to go into making reels and shorts and things like that, it's worth it to make one good one a week than 5 to 10 mediocre ones a week. Along the similar lines, choose one social media place that you really want to excel and stick to it. This was a lesson that I heard from, I'm sure, some marketing book or a YouTuber or something early on in the year. And I was like,
Well, I have all this time. I can be everywhere and do everything.
and even then, I was not excelling, spreading myself so thin. I really recommend choosing one thing and just really frickin' excelling at it. Just spreading yourself so thin, you're not going to stick. The whole idea of doing social media is to really stick in people's minds. And if you're just putting out mediocre content everywhere, you're not sticking. Especially in this like new world with AI, where everyone's just cranking out quantity, quantity, quantity. I personally think the more human, the more personal that you can put out is what's going to make you stand out. Because you're never going to be able to out quantity these BS chat GTP people that are just like pumping out crappy blog posts every single day through chat GTP. If you can't beat them on quantity, beat them on quality and just make like a smaller amount of really good stuff. And then sticking to marketing, no one cares about your logo. Everyone cares about your website. So I cannot tell you how much time I spent on this logo that barely anyone has ever seen. What I also spent a lot of time on was my website and the copy on my website. And one of the number one things that I have been complimented on the most this year has been my website. I cannot tell you how many calls I have shown up for, and someone has been like,
I saw your website and I knew you were the person to call.
and that's because my website feels really personal, really me, really talks to the type of person that I would connect with. If you're really overwhelmed by making your website, I highly recommend the book Story Brand or Building a Story Brand. I just used their templates really to walk through making the copy for my website, and it is really connected with people, and I think really helped move the needle for me this year on my business. Number 17, if a park tells you that you cannot work there anyway. Right as I got back from Texas, I went to every single RV park in the city and gave them my business cards. And a bunch of them said that they would not allow me to work there unless I paid to be advertised in their brochure. And honestly, almost every single one of those parks, I have had a customer call me and I've gone and worked there and there hasn't been a problem. Eat breakfast, bring food. I don't know why, but sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, not really that hungry. And then I just like, bring a thing of Cheez-Its on a call.
Because I'm like, oh, this call will be quick. I don't need to have a whole meal. I can come back and eat when I get back.
Assume every call is going to take twice as long as you expect and bring food accordingly. Number 16, write everything down. Assume that you have a goldfish memory. You should assume that no specific information is going to stay stuck in your head, because as soon as the next call comes in, as soon as you pick up the phone, that information is going to be gone. Especially with just like everything you need to juggle as a small business owner. Don't have your memory be the thing that fails you. Write it down. We're getting close to the end here. Write yourself out scripts for the interactions that you are most nervous about. Here's 3 that have worked really well for me. Number 1, every now and again, the UIs for either these like RV control centers or the thermostats are not intuitive. One of the most nerve-wracking things is showing up and like, you know how to fix the problem. You just don't know how to like get to the specific menu that the customer knows about because they use it every day. The easiest way to get out of this is to just ask the customer,
how would you do this? What were you doing when there was a problem?
if they end up doing something wild that's different from what you were expecting them to do, then you're like, maybe the problem isn't with the RV at all, but with the RV owner. Or they're just going to get you to the menu that you needed without you looking silly. A second script that works really well for me is every now and again you need to Google something, but you're trying to do it a little discreetly. I usually just say, I need to go look up the manual for your specific part, just to look up a specific technical specification. And that usually allows me to walk off to my car, do the quick Google that I need, and just sort of be left alone without it looking like,
oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm Googling everything.
and if you're a customer watching this, yes, most of the time I am pulling up a manual to look up a specific specification. My camera died. So the last 2 lessons are going to come courtesy of my home office. And we'll go through these pretty quick. Lesson number 22, sometimes what you say no to is even more important than what you say yes to. This is a really big part of the Pumpkin Plan, if you've read that book. This author talks a lot about how if you really concentrate on the things that are really in your wheelhouse, the things that you do very efficiently, very profitably, very well, then you have more time and space and energy for those kinds of projects. And if you say no to the things that are outside of that circle, then you have more time to concentrate on the things inside of that circle. And that's really difficult to do when you're first starting a business because you just want to say yes to everybody. And honestly, you just need the money to come in. But as soon as the calls start coming in, you got to get real comfortable with saying no to the things that are not within your realm of genius. And then finally, last but certainly not least, you gotta learn to celebrate the wins. Wow, does self-employment and owning a business just, come at you fast. And you're working towards something, and then as soon as you achieve it, you gotta move on to the next thing. And in that journey somewhere, you gotta make space to celebrate when you do hit those milestones or those goals, when you finish that big project, when you hit that profit milestone that you've been working towards. Go have the dinner, crack open the bottle of wine, at least just do like a little dance in your office. I don't know. But if you don't take a moment to at least soak it in when it happens, you'll never be happy because there's always going to be something else to do. The journey never ends. Journey before destination. Anybody? But when you do get to the destination, maybe just celebrate it for a moment. It's going to do wonders for your mental health. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are 23 life lessons that I learned this year as a new business owner. If you want to be along for the ride for 2024, go ahead and hit subscribe. I put out videos about my business, about fixing RVs, about just like being a woman in her 20s, doing the best she fucking can. This has been RV Repair Woman. You got this.